Welcome everyone. Today I want to take a look at something that I'm super passionate about, and that is mirrorless cameras. I think mirrorless cameras are definitely the future of photography. It seems that lately the industry is definitely moving in that direction, and especially with the news or rumors, whatever you want to call it, I guess news from Nikon, rumors from Canon, that Canon and Nikon are going to be really seriously entering the mirrorless scene in the coming months. I think it's a really good time to talk about mirrorless cameras, what's good and what's bad about them. Now, I do want to start this video by saying this. I am not going to make a recommendation in this video. I'm not going to end this video saying you have to buy a Sony mirrorless camera or you will be looked down upon. I think all mirrorless camera brands, the big four brands, that it would be Panasonic, Olympus, Fuji, and Sony, they all have really good things about them. But there's no one clear winner. They all have great positives and they all have some negatives. What this video is more going to be about is talking about mirrorless in general, why one might pick a mirrorless camera over a DSLR, and if you are a current DSLR shooter, why you might want to switch to mirrorless, and even more than that, if you don't have a camera, why you might want to pick up a mirrorless camera instead of a DSLR. Now, I also don't want this to turn into a DSLR hating video. There are great things about DSLRs. I love DSLRs. In fact, there's a lot of things DSLRs can do these days that mirrorless cameras have not caught up on and they have not caught up with, and we'll talk about those in this video. So basically, we're going to take one thing at a time, compare and contrast DSLR versus mirrorless, and look at the different features that they have. The first thing I want to talk about is the sensor size. In the DSLR world, there's a big kind of debate between crop sensor and full frame sensor, and full frame sensors are always touted as like the super pro. You're not a pro unless you're full frame. The same is true in the mirrorless world. There's both full frame and crop sensor mirrorless cameras. The thing with mirrorless is, though, a lot of people choose to go mirrorless because they want a camera and a lens and a system that's smaller. And the problem with full frame mirrorless cameras, and full frame cameras, all of them for that matter, is that in order to make optics, make light work in the full frame ecosystem, everything has to be bigger, everything's sized up. So a lot of the most small, compact mirrorless cameras are crop sensor, and that's okay if the goal, if your reason for going mirrorless is to save on size and weight. For me, I went mirrorless years ago because I wanted to be able to travel with a nice small bag of gear. And so for me, I opted for a crop sensor mirrorless camera and mirrorless system because that bag size got smaller. So it really depends on your reasoning. If you're going mirrorless as a first camera, you might want to go full frame mirrorless simply because you'll get more image quality out of that sensor, you'll get those inherent bonuses of a full frame camera, and you might not care that much about size. But in the world of mirrorless, Sony's got some full frame options, Sony's got some crop options, and then Fuji, Olympus, and Panasonic are all crop sensor cameras. So that might be something you care about. Another thing I want to address is batteries. Because mirrorless cameras are smaller in size, the battery life is not going to be as good out of a mirrorless camera. Usually on a DSLR you get 500, 600 frames to a battery. In the mirrorless world it's more like 200 to 300. So that just means you're going to be buying more batteries, you're going to be changing them more often. One way to combat this is to buy yourself a battery grip, like a little grip that goes on the bottom of your camera. I have one of those for my Fuji camera, and I can put 2 batteries inside of that and 1 in the camera itself, and that gives me 3 batteries worth without having to change anything. So there's definitely ways around that, but you can't expect a battery of a mirrorless camera to last as long as a DSLR, and that's getting better and better, obviously, as time goes on. One big difference between mirrorless cameras and DSLRs is the viewfinder. So if you've picked up a DSLR before, even if it's an old film camera, an old SLR, when you look through the viewfinder of the camera, you are seeing light. Light is coming through the sensor, it's bouncing off the mirror, up through the pentaprism, and out through the viewfinder. And when light does that, you are seeing an actual view out into the world. And that's really nice. That's what people have been doing for lots of years since DSLRs and SLRs came out. Mirrorless cameras don't have a mirror. They don't have one of those diagonal mirrors that bounces light. So when you look through the viewfinder of a mirrorless camera, and some mirrorless cameras don't even have viewfinders, but assuming that it does, you are seeing pixels. You're seeing basically a little screen inside of the camera. And when you look at that screen is a live feed from the sensor in the back of the camera. Now, this is really nice for some things. For one, you can actually see your exposure in real time. So as you lighten and darken your exposure settings, say you're changing your shutter speed around, you will see that reflected in the view through the viewfinder. So exposing is really easy with a mirrorless camera. If it looks too dark on the viewfinder, brighten it up. If it looks too bright, darken it down. You're not seeing light, you're seeing pixels. Now, a lot of people get afraid because they think of like old point and shoot days where there were these old digital point and shoots back in the day that had a electronic viewfinder. It's called an EVF. And you would point the camera around and there'd be like a 3-second delay. So you'd point this way and the view that you saw through the viewfinder would slowly catch up to where you were. And that's totally a thing of the past. The current mirrorless cameras have very little delay with the electronic viewfinder. Feels very much like you're actually there. There's very snappy, very responsive, especially in the newer cameras. So if you're okay with that, you definitely need to understand that a DSLR is going to be seeing light. You're going to be looking at light directly through the lens, and a mirrorless camera, you're going to be seeing pixels. There's definitely advantages to both, but that comes down to what you prefer. Another thing I want to talk about and compare is autofocus. Autofocus is something that DSLRs have had, obviously, since the beginning. SLRs got, many years ago. And in that time, it's been being perfected and changed and refined and made really, really good, to the point that DSLRs these days are really snappy. Like the Canon 1DX, a really, really tuned sports camera. It can focus so quick, so fast to grab that focus point. Mirrorless cameras have lagged behind a little bit. They've definitely not been up there at the speed of a DSLR. But with the recent cameras, especially the new releases from Sony and from Olympus and from Fuji, every time they upgrade the camera, that autofocus gets a little bit better. So I would say the autofocus performance is not quite there with all mirrorless cameras. Some of them are definitely exceptions, but every iteration it's getting better and better and better. And I would say that currently there are some mirrorless cameras that are just as good, if not better, than DSLRs. But if you go back to the older mirrorless cameras, you're definitely going to be hurting a little bit when you look at autofocus. Now, in the world of manual focus, and specifically in the world of video, one advantage that mirrorless cameras have over DSLRs is focus peaking. Focus peaking is something that video shooters use a lot. Still photographers actually use it sometimes too. But it's essentially where when you're focusing on manual focus, the edges in the frame that are currently sharp, they will peak. They will shine bright red or green or white to indicate that that area of the image is sharp. And that's a super nice feature as a video shooter or a still photographer to know exactly where your focus point is. And that's something that's pretty unique just to mirrorless cameras. So that's a really nice feature if you care about manual focus and precision. Another thing to talk about is lens selection. Canon and Nikon have been out for years, and in that time they have like a bunch of lenses, obviously. The mirrorless cameras, they're a little newer to the scene, and so the lens selection that you have to choose from is a bit more limited. To make matters worse, Tamron and Sigma and those common lens manufacturers, they've been a little slow to start making lenses for the common mirrorless mounts as well. So if you really care about having a bunch of lenses, like if you're one of those people that wants to own 30 lenses, I know people who do that. Good for them, like good for you if you're one of those people too. If you want to be one of those people, it's probably going to be hard to do that in the mirrorless world. That's really a DSLR thing when you have years and years and years of Canon and Nikon lenses to choose from. With that said, because Panasonic and Olympus share the same lens mount, the Micro Four Thirds lens mount and the Micro Four Thirds sensor, all lenses that are made by Olympus and Panasonic for Micro Four Thirds are interchangeable. So if you go with Olympus or Panasonic, you can use lenses of the opposite brand. And that's kind of cool. It doubles the amount of lenses you can look at. With Fuji or with Sony, you're limited to those brand lenses or adapters, or some lenses from Sigma will fit, some lenses from Zeiss will fit, and some other brands as well. But I would definitely say if you're looking for like massive amounts of lenses to choose from, you're going to win out in the DSLR world. They just have the history, they have the past there where there's a lot of used lenses available, just a big selection of used and new lenses. So lens selection's your thing, DSLRs definitely take the win on that one. One big thing to talk about is size, and I've addressed it a little bit already, but you're going to take a big gain in size when you go with a mirrorless camera. The mirrorless body itself is going to be smaller, but also mostly the lenses are going to be smaller as well. Now, I talked a little bit about sensor size earlier in the video, and we talked about how the smaller the sensor is, the smaller the system can be. And that's super true. So Fuji and Olympus and Panasonic, they all use a crop sensor, and so does Sony. Sony has a variety that has a crop sensor as well. If you're talking a crop sensor mirrorless camera, the body can be smaller, the lenses can be smaller, everything is smaller. So if you are going for that small size to keep things in a small little bag, you're definitely going to want to go with one of the crop sensor mirrorless cameras, not the full frames from Sony. Sorry, Sony. I love you, but I don't. Not when you're going for small things. When you're looking at different brands of mirrorless, when you're comparing those 4 major brands, every brand has a downside. There's no like one camera that's amazing. And that's what's really cool about the mirrorless world. It really comes down to what you prefer. If it were me and I was going into the mirrorless world looking for the best possible camera and size and weight were not a consideration, I would probably go with Sony's full frame variety. Their new A7 III is amazing. It's a fantastic camera, but it's full frame. So the size and the weight is a little bit bigger than the others. Fuji, on the other hand, they're using an APS-C size sensor, so everything can be smaller, and their image quality is almost as good as the Sony. It's definitely not there, but it's close. And then Panasonic and Olympus, like I talked about, they have a huge selection of lenses because they work together, which is a really big benefit of that brand. But again, there's no real winner here. Like, I know tons of photographers who use every variety of mirrorless camera, and that's cool. That means that there's just a lot of competition in the marketplace. There's a lot of different brands vying for the ultimate spot. And on top of that, Canon and Nikon are both rumored, well, Nikon's confirmed, but they're both going to be entering the mirrorless world at the end of this year. So we'll also get to see what they release in a real serious way. And it's really going to be neat having 6 brands all working in the mirrorless world. Canon and Nikon, the 2 like kings of cameras, trying to catch up in the mirrorless world to what those other 4 have already created. So I'm really interested to see what's going to happen in the future with these cameras. One other thing where mirrorless really shines is in the video world. A lot of the mirrorless manufacturers have put a lot of emphasis into making the video capabilities of the mirrorless cameras be really, really good. And on top of being very good at shooting video, mirrorless cameras also, because they are smaller, they're able to be used on those little one-handed gimbal stabilizers much easier than a larger DSLR. A DSLR, you're usually working with like a big 2-handed gimbal system, which is heavy, you gotta lug it around. Whereas mirrorless cameras, you can buy a cheap little gimbal and just like toss it on there. It's very easy to kind of run and gun with a mirrorless camera versus a larger DSLR. So that's a big advantage, as well as, like I said, those brands that make mirrorless, they're really putting a lot of emphasis into making really good video, especially from Fuji, Panasonic, and Sony. Those 3 brands really care a lot about video and making really good quality video stuff. So if you're interested in video, I'd definitely look at those 3. Sony specifically does an amazing job, and Panasonic, they both do amazing jobs at video. But if you're a still photographer, you got to find that happy balance. So that's the other great thing. You can get cameras that work well with both, which is really cool. One camera can really do it all these days, which is kind of awesome. One other thing to consider when you're looking at mirrorless and DSLRs is the genre of photography that you shoot. So because DSLRs have been around for so long, they're very fast. They're very snappy. They turn on quickly. They fire off rounds quickly, rounds being photos, obviously. They're fast at autofocusing. They're just refined cameras, which is great. So if you are someone who is a quick shooter, like a sports photographer, and obviously I'm excluding some of the newest mirrorless releases. Sony's A9 is amazing at sports, but if we talk just mirrorless in general versus DSLRs in general, in my opinion, DSLRs have the edge when it comes to fast shooting. Another thing is if you're a studio photographer and you're shooting with lights and strobes and things, there are some little weird nuances that you have to deal with mirrorless that make things a little more complicated than with a DSLR. Specifically dealing with the viewfinder, with an optical viewfinder versus an electronic viewfinder. When you're using an electronic viewfinder in the studio, it makes things a little bit more difficult. So if you're a studio photographer and you do a lot of work with strobes, I would probably recommend sticking with DSLRs unless you're okay dealing with a little bit of funkiness. With that said, the other side of the coin is like the photojournalists and the documentary photographers. Mirrorless is great. It's smaller, it's less I guess, intimidating to the people that you're shooting. It's really nice to be able to carry around a really small mirrorless camera to do street photography or documentary photography, because the people you're photographing, they don't get intimidated by you. And that's a huge thing. When you hold up like a big old Canon 1DX, people clam up. They think that you're a professional. They think that they have to act a certain way. When you have a little mirrorless camera, you hold that up, you look like a tourist. So people just go along their way. They're like, whatever. That's awesome. So if you're going to travel a lot and you're going to shoot people or street photography or documentary, mirrorless is awesome. That smaller size, less intimidation, it's really, really great. One other thing you can consider too is that all these mirrorless cameras, there's adapters that you can buy that actually let you use your current lenses for the most part with the mirrorless cameras. Now, depending on the adapter, sometimes you lose the ability to change your aperture or to autofocus. But for some old lenses and some new lenses, you can put them on your mirrorless camera and use them just like you would on your full-size DSLR. So if you've invested into a lens kit for Nikon or Canon or another brand, chances are you can adapt that to mirrorless and still use the same glass, which makes the barrier to entry and the cost to entry to get a mirrorless camera much, much, much less. So that's a really big bonus for those cameras as well. To summarize, I think that mirrorless cameras are great. They're really awesome. They've come into their own in the last few years, and they're really starting to gain a lot of popularity. What I will say though is that you need to do your research. I wouldn't just jump into mirrorless because you think it's cool or because your friend is doing it or something like that. Definitely do some looking on your own, decide whether this is the right choice for you, because mirrorless cameras all have downsides. They're not going to be as well thought out, not thought out, I shouldn't say that, but as well refined as a DSLR will be. Also, do your research on brands, because there's a lot of differences between the different brands, and they all like to put emphasis on different things. So what Sony holds as most important is very different than what Fuji holds as most important. Because these mirrorless cameras are so versatile, they all have a different thing that they are best at. With that said, all of these cameras are great. They're all going to take great photographs, and it really doesn't matter that much as far as what you pick. What matters is that you bring the camera with you, you shoot with it every day, you like it, you enjoy it, and all of that kind of stuff. So there's no right answer here. Do your research, have fun, figure things out, and just enjoy these cameras. Talk to people that you know that use them, see what they say. If you have questions, definitely leave them down in the comments section down below. I'm happy to answer that. We have a lot of exposure to different cameras here at the school, so we can talk about and compare and contrast the different things that we've learned through seeing students and through using these cameras ourselves. If you like this video, hit that thumbs up button. You disliked it, hit the dislike button. If you want to subscribe to our channel, there's a button down there in the corner. There's also a button up there in that corner. So click that if you want to stay up to date with future videos. And if you know someone who might like this video, hit that share button down in the corner and you can get a little link that you can share on Facebook, share it on text message, email it to someone. Anyone you think might like this video, go ahead and share that. And lastly, a special thanks to Canon. Canon actually is sponsoring our channel. They provided some gear that we're using to shoot our videos now. They're super generous to us. They've been a longtime sponsor of the school, so a special thank you to Canon as well. Thanks for watching.